The sound of metal ratcheting against bone silenced the entire terminal. 1 second, 19-year-old Kyle Sterling was scanning his boarding pass for a first-class seat to Zurich. The next, his face was pressed against the cold laminate of the check-in desk, his arm twisted behind his back by a security officer 3 times his size. "Stop resisting!" the guard screamed, though Kyle hadn't moved a muscle. Standing over him, gate agent Brenda Vance smirked, holding his platinum ticket like a trophy. "I told you," she spat, playing to the crowd of horrified onlookers. "We don't allow thugs in the Diamond Lane." She thought she had just caught a criminal. She had no idea she had just assaulted the heir to the entire airline empire. And the man walking down the jet bridge behind her was about to end her entire career. The air at JFK's Terminal 4, specifically the exclusive Ascend Airways Diamond Wing, usually smelled of expensive espresso and faint, sterile citrus. Today, however, the atmosphere was thick with tension, centered entirely around the podium of senior gate agent Brenda Vance. Brenda had worked for Ascend Airways for 22 years. She wore her polyester navy blue uniform not just as clothing, but as armor. Her name tag was polished to a mirror shine, and her hair was pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to pull her eyelids back, giving her a permanent expression of skepticism. Brenda viewed herself as the last line of defense between the civilized world of first class and the chaotic rabble of economy. She had a sixth sense for upgrades, non-revs, and anyone she deemed out of place. It was 4:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. Flight AA 908 to Zurich was beginning pre-boarding. Enter Kyle Sterling. Kyle didn't look like the typical clientele of the Diamond Wing. He wasn't wearing a bespoke Italian suit like the hedge fund manager in Line A, nor was he draped in the quiet luxury of cashmere shawls like the elderly woman in Line B. Kyle, a 19-year-old black college student, was wearing an oversized vintage grey hoodie from a thrift store, loose-fitting joggers, and a pair of beat-up retro sneakers. Over his ears sat a pair of noise-cancelling headphones worth more than Brenda's monthly car payment, though she assumed they were knockoffs. He walked with a casual, easy gait, a backpack slung over one shoulder. He was tired. He had just finished a grueling 48-hour coding hackathon in Brooklyn and was flying to Zurich to meet his father for a rare family dinner before the World Economic Forum. Kyle approached the priority lane. The red velvet rope was unhooked. He stepped through. "Excuse me." Brenda's voice cut through the ambient noise like a whip crack. She didn't look up from her computer screen at first, just held up a hand adorned with cheap, clunky rings. Kyle paused, sliding his headphones down to his neck. "Yes, ma'am?" Brenda finally looked up. Her eyes did a quick, vertical scan. Shoes, joggers, hoodie, skin color. Her lip curled slightly, a micro-expression of disgust she didn't bother to hide. "The economy line is around the corner, near the food court," she said, pointing a manicured finger toward the crowded general boarding area where hundreds of people were jostling for position. "This is for Diamond and Platinum members only. Read the sign." Kyle blinked, his demeanor calm. He was used to this. Sadly, he had been used to this his whole life. "I know. I'm on this flight. Seat 1A. Brenda let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of humor. "Seat 1A? Honey, Seat 1A is reserved for full-fare dignitaries. You're lost. Go to the back before you hold up the paying customers." Behind Kyle, a man in a tan suit cleared his throat impatiently. "Come on, kid, move it along," the man grumbled, checking his Rolex. "I have my boarding pass right here," Kyle said, pulling his phone out of his pocket. The screen brightness was maxed out, displaying the distinct gold and black QR code of an Ascend Airways Global Elite ticket. He reached toward the scanner. Brenda's hand shot out, covering the scanner glass. "Don't you dare!" she hissed. "I'm not having you glitch my machine with some Photoshop screenshot you bought off a Telegram scam channel. I see this all the time with you people." The terminal went quiet. The phrase, "you people," hung in the air, heavy and radioactive. Kyle stood up straighter. He was 6'2", but he slouched to appear less threatening, a survival mechanism ingrained in him by his mother. Now, he squared his shoulders. "My name is Kyle Sterling. If you check the manifest, you'll see I'm checked in. Please move your hand." "I don't need to check the manifest to know a fraud when I see one," Brenda snapped. She stepped out from behind the podium, effectively blocking the jet bridge entrance with her body. She crossed her arms. "You are trespassing in a secure area. Turn around, walk away, and maybe I won't call the police for attempted fraud." "You're making a mistake," Kyle said, his voice dropping an octave, deadly serious. "A very expensive mistake." "Are you threatening me?" Brenda's voice pitched up, designed to attract attention. She looked at the line of passengers behind Kyle, seeking validation. "He's threatening me. Did you hear that?" "I heard it," piped up a woman in a floral dress, clutching a Louis Vuitton bag. "He was very aggressive." Kyle looked at the woman, then back at Brenda. He sighed, reaching into his pocket to retrieve his physical ID, thinking that would solve it. "He's reaching for something," Brenda shrieked. That was the signal. The reaction was instantaneous. Because this was an airport, tension was already high. Because Brenda had used the trigger words implied by her scream, the situation went from a customer service dispute to a security threat in seconds. 2 TSA agents who were passing by stopped, hands hovering near their belts. But the person who responded first was the private security contractor assigned to the gate, a man named Officer Miller. Miller was a man who had failed the police academy entrance exam 3 times and compensated for it by treating the airport terminal like a war zone. He had been waiting all day for something to happen. "Back away from the agent!" Miller bellowed, rushing over. He didn't assess the situation. He saw a middle-aged white woman pointing a finger and a young black man in a hoodie standing his ground. The math, in Miller's biased brain, was simple. Kyle froze, his hands slowly coming out of his pocket, holding nothing but a slim leather wallet. "I'm just getting my ID. She claims I'm not on the flight." "I didn't ask for your life story, pal. I told you to back up." Miller got into Kyle's personal space, chest bumping him. "Officer, he tried to force his way onto the plane." Brenda lied, her voice breathless with feigned victimhood. "He has a fake ticket, and he threatened me when I caught him. I think he's drunk or on something. Look at his eyes." Kyle's eyes were red, certainly, from 48 hours of staring at C++ code and drinking energy drinks. But he was stone-cold sober. "I am a passenger," Kyle said, looking Miller in the eye. "Scan my phone, that's all you have to do. Just scan the code." "I'm not scanning anything," Miller spat. "You're disrupting airport operations. That's a federal offense." By now the crowd had swelled. Dozens of people from the economy section had drifted over, sensing the commotion. Smartphones were out. The red recording dots were blinking like a constellation of digital eyes. "Why won't you just check his ticket?" a young woman from the back of the crowd shouted. "He hasn't done anything." "Stay out of this," Brenda yelled back at the crowd. "This is a security matter." She turned back to Miller. "He needs to be removed. Now. My paying customers are waiting." Kyle looked at Brenda. "If you remove me, you will be terminated. I promise you that." Brenda laughed, a cruel, incredulous sound. "Did you hear that? He thinks he can fire me. I've been with Ascend for 22 years. I am the gate. You're just a thug in a hoodie." "Last warning," Miller growled, his hand unclipping the baton from his belt. "Turn around and put your hands behind your head." "I have a right to board my flight," Kyle insisted, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. He knew the statistics. He knew how this went. But he also knew who his father was. He had texted his dad, Alexander, 3 minutes ago. Gate A4. Emergency. But the message was stuck on delivered. His dad was likely already in the air or in a dead zone. "I'm not leaving," Kyle said firmly. Miller didn't wait for another word. He lunged. The violence was shocking in its abruptness. Miller grabbed Kyle's left wrist and twisted it with a practiced, brutal motion designed to inflict maximum pain compliance. Kyle gasped, his knees buckling instinctively to relieve the pressure on his shoulder joint. "Get down! Get on the ground!" Miller roared, kicking Kyle's legs out from under him. Kyle hit the floor hard. His chin slammed against the industrial carpet, biting his tongue. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. He didn't fight back. He went limp. The passive resistance he had been taught was the only way to survive an encounter like this. "I'm not resisting!" Kyle choked out, his face pressed into the dust of the floor. "Shut up!" Miller drove his knee into the small of Kyle's back, putting his full 200-pound weight on the boy's spine. Click, click. The handcuffs were tight, too tight. They bit into the ulnar nerve of Kyle's wrists. Brenda watched from above, a look of triumphant satisfaction on her face. She smoothed her skirt. "Thank you, officer. Honestly, the nerve of some people. Thinking they can just waltz into first class." She turned to the line of stunned passengers. "I apologize for the delay, ladies and gentlemen. We keep the Diamond Lane exclusive for a reason. We have to keep out the riffraff. Boarding will commence in just a moment." "You're hurting him!" the young woman from the crowd shouted again, pushing to the front. She was filming. "He wasn't doing anything. He just wanted to scan his ticket." "Ma'am, step back or you'll be joining him," Miller threatened, breathing heavily as he hauled Kyle up by the handcuff chain. Kyle grimaced, his shoulders screaming in agony. Miller shoved Kyle toward the podium, forcing him to lean over it. "Empty your pockets. Now." "I can't," Kyle whispered. "I'm handcuffed." Miller scoffed and jammed his rough hands into Kyle's hoodie pocket. He pulled out the wallet. He opened it. Inside there was no cash, just a sleek, black metal card. The Centurion, and a student ID for MIT, and a California driver's license. Miller paused. The black card was heavy. It was real. He frowned, looking at the name. Kyle Alexander Sterling. "He stole it," Brenda said quickly, seeing the hesitation in Miller's eyes. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look at him. Does he look like he has a Centurion card? He probably mugged someone outside the terminal. That's why he was so desperate to get on the plane. He's fleeing the scene." Miller's bias overrode the evidence in his hand. "Yeah, makes sense. Probably stole the wallet and the phone." Miller keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Miller at Gate A4. I have a suspect in custody. Attempted breach of security, possible credit card theft, disorderly conduct. Need a transport to the holding cell." Kyle, leaning against the counter, closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He simply waited. "You're going to jail, kid," Brenda hissed in his ear. "And I'm going to press charges for assault. I'll say you pushed me. Who are they going to believe? Me, a senior agent, or you?" Kyle opened his eyes. He looked past Brenda, through the glass of the jet bridge doors. The massive Boeing 777-300ER parked outside was beautiful. The livery was silver and blue. The tail fin bore the proud logo of Ascend Airways, a stylized falcon. And walking up the jet bridge from the plane, having just finished his pre-flight inspection with the captain, was a tall man in a bespoke charcoal suit. He had salt and pepper hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and a presence that sucked the oxygen out of a room. It was Alexander Sterling, the CEO and founder of Ascend Airways. He was looking down at his phone, frowning. He had just received a text. Gate A4. Emergency. Alexander looked up through the glass doors. He saw the crowd. He saw the security guard. He saw the gate agent. And then he saw his son, handcuffed, bleeding from the lip, bent over the check-in desk. The color drained from Alexander Sterling's face, replaced instantly by a shade of red that signaled a volcanic eruption. He didn't just walk toward the door, he stormed toward it. Brenda, unaware of the doom approaching from behind her, was busy typing on her computer, logging the incident as passenger aggression. "I hope you like prison food," she muttered to Kyle. The jet bridge door burst open with such force that it slammed against the magnetic stopper, cracking the plaster on the wall. The silence that followed the slamming of the jet bridge door was heavy, suffocating. Every head in the terminal turned. Alexander Sterling stood there, his chest heaving slightly, his eyes scanning the scene with the precision of a predator. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the confused TSA agents running over. His eyes were locked on one thing, the silver handcuffs digging into his son's wrists. Brenda, blinded by her own ego and adrenaline, didn't recognize him instantly. In her mind, the CEO was a face in a company newsletter, a distant figure in a glossy magazine, not a flesh-and-blood man standing in her boarding area. To her, this was just another entitled first-class passenger interfering with her authority. "Sir!" Brenda shouted, stepping around the podium, hand raised. "You cannot exit the jet bridge once you've boarded. Return to the aircraft immediately, or I will have you removed too." Alexander didn't even blink. He walked right past her, as if she were a ghost. Officer Miller, feeling the need to reassert dominance, stepped in front of Alexander, his hand resting on his baton. "Hey buddy, you deaf? The lady said get back on the plane. This is a crime scene." Alexander stopped. He stood 3 inches taller than Miller. He looked down at the security guard's name tag, then up at his eyes. The look Alexander gave him was colder than the air at 30,000 feet. "Move," Alexander said. The word was quiet, but it carried the weight of a collapsing building. "I said back off," Miller barked, reaching out to shove Alexander's chest. Alexander caught Miller's wrist in midair. He didn't twist it. He didn't use a martial arts move. He just held it there with an iron grip, stopping the man cold. "If you touch me," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, "I will ensure that not only do you lose your badge, but you will be sued into such financial ruin that your great-grandchildren will be born in debt. Now, step aside." Miller, stunned by the sheer authority radiating from the man, faltered. He pulled his hand back, confused. "Who do you think you are?" Alexander ignored him. He knelt down beside Kyle. The rage in his eyes softened instantly into heartbreak. He saw the cut on Kyle's lip, the dust on his cheek. "Kyle," Alexander said softly. "Are you all right?" Kyle looked up, managing a weak, painful smile. "Hey, Dad, I told them I was in seat 1A. They didn't believe me." The word "Dad" rang out like a gunshot in the quiet terminal. Brenda froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her brain was trying to process the impossible equation. "Dad?" This thug in the hoodie called the man in the bespoke suit. "Dad? Dad?" Brenda squeaked, her voice trembling. He's your son?" Alexander stood up slowly. He turned to face Brenda. The tenderness was gone. The CIO was back. "Yes," Alexander said, his voice projecting so everyone in the terminal could hear. "He is my son, and I am Alexander Sterling. I own this airline. I own this terminal, and I want to know why my son is in handcuffs." The color drained from Brenda's face so fast, she looked like a wax figure. The name registered. Sterling. It was on her paychecks. It was on the building. It was on the tail of the plane. Mr. Sterling, Brenda stammered, her hands shaking as she clasped them together. I didn't know. He didn't say. He has my last name, Alexander cut her off, his voice slicing through her excuses. He has a valid ticket. He has ID. Did you check any of it? I thought it was fake, Brenda cried out, desperate to salvage the situation. He doesn't look like… look at how he's dressed. We have standards in the Diamond Wing. I was just trying to protect the company. Protect the company? Alexander laughed darkly. By assaulting a passenger? By profiling a student? He turned to Miller. Unlock him. Now. Miller, realizing he had just made a catastrophic error, fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped them twice. I was just following protocol, sir. The agent said he was a threat. She said he threatened her. Alexander watched as the cuffs clicked open. Kyle rubbed his wrists, wincing. Alexander pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to his son to wipe the blood from his lip. Did you threaten her, Kyle? Alexander asked, loud enough for the witnesses to hear. No, Kyle said, his voice raspy. I asked her to scan my phone. She covered the scanner. She called me, "You people." Then she screamed for help when I reached for my wallet. He's lying, Brenda shrieked. She was panicking now, flailing. He was aggressive. Ask the other passengers. Alexander turned to the crowd. Did anyone see what happened? The young woman with the phone stepped forward immediately. I recorded the whole thing, she said, holding up her device. He was perfectly polite. She refused to serve him. She called him a fraud before he even showed his ticket, and the guard tackled him for no reason. I saw it too, the man in the tan suit shouted. The kid did nothing wrong. Me too, another voice rang out. The terminal had turned against her. Brenda looked around, wild-eyed. Alexander held out his hand to the young woman. May I see the video? She handed him the phone. Alexander watched it. For 20 seconds, the only sound was the playback of Brenda's shrill voice. I'm not having you glitch my machine. I see this all the time with you people. Alexander handed the phone back. His face was stone. He pulled out his own phone and dialed a number. He didn't put it to his ear. He put it on speaker. Yes, Mr. Sterling, answered a crisp, efficient voice. It was Jameson Locke, the Chief General Counsel for Ascend Airways and one of the most feared litigators in New York. Jameson, Alexander said, I'm at Gate A4 at JFK. I need you to trigger the emergency protocol, immediate suspension of all ground staff at this gate, and get the Port Authority Police Chief on the line. I want to file criminal charges. Understood, sir, Jameson replied. Who are we charging? Brenda Vance, Alexander said, reading her name tag. And a private security contractor named Miller. Charges are assault, battery, false imprisonment, and defamation. On it! Police are 2 minutes out. Brenda let out a wail. Mr. Sterling, please. I've been here 22 years. I have a pension. It was a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to put a bag tag on a suitcase, Alexander said, stepping closer to her. What you did was prejudice disguised as policy. You saw a young black man and decided he didn't belong. You decided he was a criminal because he wore a hoodie. You didn't just insult my son. You insulted every value this company stands for. He looked at Miller. And you. You enjoy hurting people, don't you? I saw the way you twisted his arm. You didn't want to de-escalate. You wanted a fight. Miller looked at his boots, silent. The atmosphere in Terminal 4 had shifted from a scene of public disturbance to something far more clinical and terrifying. It was the feeling of a vacuum being sealed, the air pressure dropping right before a storm hits. Alexander Sterling stood over the cowering form of Brenda Vance, his phone still in his hand, the speakerphone active. On the other end was Jameson Locke, a man whose hourly billing rate was higher than Brenda's annual salary. "Jameson," Alexander said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "The police are entering the terminal now. I want you to walk the officers through the charges. I don't want any ambiguity." "Understood, Mr. Sterling," Jameson's voice, crisp, metallic, and echoing slightly through the silent boarding area. "I have the district attorney on the other line. We are bypassing the standard complaint procedure." Brenda Vance looked up, her face a mask of smudged makeup and crumbling arrogance. She looked at the glass doors of the terminal entrance. 4 officers from the Port Authority Police Department, PAPD, were marching toward Gate A4. These weren't the private security contractors like Miller, who wore ill-fitting uniforms and carried flashlights. These were sworn law enforcement officers with firearms, heavy utility belts, and faces that brooked no nonsense. Leading them was a sergeant with stripes on his sleeve and a tablet in his hand. Officer Miller, who had been standing with his hand resting nervously on his baton, suddenly took a step back. The color drained from his face. He knew the difference between a mall cop and the real thing. He instinctively moved his hand away from his weapon, adopting a posture of submission. "Over here, Sergeant," Alexander called out, his voice projecting command. The sergeant, a burly man named Kovacs, approached the scene. He looked at Kyle, who was leaning against the desk holding a bloody handkerchief to his lip. He looked at Alexander in his bespoke suit. He looked at Brenda, trembling behind the podium. And he looked at Miller. "We got a call about a Code 30, assault in progress," Sergeant Kovacs said, his eyes scanning the room for threats. Dispatch said the caller was Alexander Sterling. "That is me," Alexander said. He didn't offer a handshake. He offered ID. He pulled his passport from his jacket pocket, a diplomatic-looking document, and handed it to the sergeant. "I am the CEO of this airline. That is my son. And these 2 individuals have just assaulted him, falsely imprisoned him, and violated his civil rights." Sergeant Kovacs looked at the ID, then back at Alexander. Recognition dawned on him. "Mr. Sterling. Okay, we're securing the scene." "You can't be serious!" Brenda suddenly shrieked. The silence broke. Her survival instinct, honed by decades of petty bureaucratic tyranny, kicked in. She scrambled out from behind the podium, pointing a shaking finger at Kyle. "Officer, thank God you're here. These 2 men are disrupting a federal flight. That boy, that thug, refused to show his ticket. He lunged at me. And now this man is threatening my job. I want them both removed." She fell back on the only tactic she knew, the Karen defense. She weaponized her tears, her uniform, and her demographic. She tried to make herself the victim, assuming the police would automatically side with the dutiful employee over the black teenager and his angry father. Sergeant Kovacs turned to Brenda. He didn't smile. He didn't offer sympathy. He looked at her with the weary expression of a man who had seen this dynamic play out 1,000 times. "Mum, step back," Kovacs said flatly. "But he assaulted me," Brenda lied, her voice pitching up into a hysterical wail. "He pushed me. I have a bad back. I need a medic." "Actually," a voice cut in from the speakerphone in Alexander's hand. It was Jameson Locke, the lawyer. "We have access to the terminal CCTV feed, Sergeant." "What, Sergeant? I am watching the footage right now from the Ascend Airways security hub in Manhattan. At no point did Kyle Sterling touch Ms. Vance. However, at timestamp 16:30, Ms. Vance is clearly seen physically blocking the scanner, and at 16:15:10, Officer Miller performs an unauthorized takedown on a compliant subject." Brenda froze. She had forgotten about the cameras. She had forgotten that in the modern world, the eye of God is a 4K lens mounted in the ceiling. Who is that? Brenda whispered, looking at the phone in horror. That, Alexander said, stepping closer to her, is the man who is going to ensure you don't just lose your job, Brenda. He's going to ensure you lose your freedom. Alexander nodded to Sergeant Kovac. Sergeant, I am pressing formal charges for assault in the 2nd degree, unlawful imprisonment, and filing a false police report. My legal team has already faxed the complaint to your precinct. Kovac nodded. He turned to his officers. All right. Let's wrap this up. The officers moved. 2 of them headed for Miller. Miller tried to play the brotherhood card. Hey guys, listen. I'm on the job too. I'm with Securitas. The kid was resisting. I used standard pain compliance. You know how it is, right? One of the Port Authority officers, a woman who looked like she could bench press Miller, grabbed his arm. You're not on the job, pal. You're a contractor, and you don't break a kid's arm for a boarding pass dispute. Turn around. Wait, come on, Miller stammered as she spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and distinct. Click, 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 click. It was the exact same sound that had echoed when Miller cuffed Kyle. The poetic justice of it rippled through the crowd. A few passengers actually cheered. Officer Miller, the female officer recited, you are under arrest for assault and battery. You have the right to remain silent. Miller's head dropped. He knew his career was over. He would never work security again. He'd be lucky to get a job guarding a dumpster after this. But Brenda was not going quietly. As 2 officers approached her, she backed up until she hit the wall of the jet bridge. No, you can't touch me. I am a senior gate agent. I have union protection. I know my rights. Miss Vance, Sergeant Kovac said, stepping into her personal space. You are under arrest. Place your hands behind your back. I will not, she screamed, flailing her arms. I am a mother. I am a grandmother. You can't arrest me in front of these people. It's embarrassing. You embarrassed yourself when you decided to racially profile a paying customer, Alexander said, his voice cutting through her hysterics like a scalpel. You wanted an audience, Brenda. You wanted everyone to see you protecting the gate. Well, look at them. They're watching. Brenda looked at the crowd. There were at least 100 people. Every single one of them had a phone out. They weren't looking at her with respect or gratitude. They were looking at her with disgust. They were witnessing the fall of a tyrant. Please, Brenda whimpered, her fight suddenly leaving her. She looked at Alexander with pleading, wet eyes. Mr. Sterling, please. I have a pension. I'm 3 years away from retirement. If I get a record, I lose everything. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was your son. Alexander stared at her. The silence stretched for 5 agonizing seconds. That is exactly the problem, Alexander said softly. You are sorry because he is my son. If he had been anyone else's son, you would be high-fiving that security guard right now. You aren't sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. He nodded to the sergeant. Kovac grabbed Brenda's wrists. He didn't twist them like Miller had done to Kyle. He was professional, but he was firm. He pulled her arms back. Click, click. The steel bracelets locked around her wrists. Brenda gasped, the cold metal signaling the end of her life as she knew it. The uniform she wore, which she had treated like a robe of absolute power, was now just a costume for a prisoner. Brenda Vance, Kovac intoned, you are under arrest. As the officers began to lead her away, Alexander raised a hand. One moment, Sergeant. Before you take her to booking, there is one administrative matter I need to handle. It will only take 10 seconds. Alexander walked behind the podium, Brenda's sacred territory. He stepped into the space she had guarded so jealously. He looked at the computer terminal. He typed in his executive override credentials. The screen flashed green. Access granted. Level 5 Administrator. The crowd watched in hushed fascination. What was he doing? Alexander navigated to the passenger management system. He typed in a name. Vance Brenda. He hit a series of keys. Then he hit Enter. The small thermal printer on the desk whirred to life. Zust, zust. It spat out a long slip of paper. Alexander tore the paper off. He walked over to where Brenda stood in handcuffs, flanked by police officers. He held the paper up so she could read it. It was a standard boarding pass notification, but the text was different. In bold black letters across the top, it read, Status Denied. Below that, in the field for Flight Number, it read, All Flights. What is that? Brenda stammered, tears streaming down her face. This, Alexander said, his voice projecting to the back of the room, is a formal notice of exclusion. He tucked the paper into the breast pocket of her blazer, right behind her Ascend Airways wings. As of this moment, your employment is terminated for cause, Alexander declared. Furthermore, I have just placed you on the global blacklist for Ascend Airways and our 24 partner airlines. You are banned from flying on this carrier for life. You will not fly first class. You will not fly economy. You will not fly cargo. He leaned in close, his eyes boring into hers. You used my airline to make people feel small. So now, the world just got a lot bigger for you, Brenda, because you're going to be walking everywhere. Brenda let out a sob that was half gasp, half wail. The finality of it crushed her. The airline was her life. It was her identity. And with a few keystrokes, the owner himself had erased her from it. Get them out of here, Alexander said, turning his back on her. The police marched them away. The walk of shame was brutal. As Brenda and Miller were led past the lines of passengers, the crowd parted. There were no jeers, no shouting, just a heavy, judgmental silence, broken only by the rapid-fire clicking of camera shutters. Brenda kept her head down, unable to meet the eyes of the people she had barked orders at just 20 minutes ago. As the automatic doors slid shut behind the police escort, the tension in the terminal finally broke. Alexander let out a long, slow breath. He adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at the gate area, now devoid of staff. The passengers were standing there, confused, waiting for direction. Alexander stepped up to the microphone at the podium. He tapped it twice. Thump, thump. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander said. His voice was tired but warm. My name is Alexander Sterling. I am the CEO of Ascend Airways. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. I want to apologize personally for what you just witnessed. Violence and discrimination have no home here. I know this has been distressing, and I know your flight is delayed. He looked at the computer screen again. He typed rapidly. I have just authorized a full refund for every passenger booked on Flight 908 today, he announced. You will fly to Zurich for free. Additionally, I am depositing 50,000 miles into each of your frequent flyer accounts as an apology for the disruption. The crowd erupted. It wasn't just polite applause, it was a roar of approval. People high-fived. The tension evaporated, replaced by the giddy realization that they had just witnessed justice and scored a free trip to Europe. Now, Alexander continued, since our gate agent is currently indisposed, I will be handling the boarding process myself. He smiled, a genuine, charming smile that reminded everyone why he was the face of the brand. Who is in Group 1? The passengers laughed. The mood had completely flipped. Alexander waved Kyle over. Kyle, grab your bag. You're boarding first. Kyle pushed off the wall. His adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion. He walked toward the jet bridge door, his backpack slung over his uninjured shoulder. He paused as he passed the podium. He looked at his father. Alexander wasn't looking at the computer. He was looking at Kyle with an expression of intense, painful love. He reached out and squeezed Kyle's shoulder. "You handled yourself with dignity, son," Alexander whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "More dignity than anyone here deserved." "I just wanted to get on the plane, Dad," Kyle said quietly. "I know," Alexander nodded. "Go on. Take seat 1A. I'll be right there." Kyle turned and walked into the jet bridge. The tunnel was quiet now. The echoes of Brenda's screaming and Miller's threats were gone. There was just the hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit and the sound of his own sneakers on the metal floor. He had walked into this terminal a suspect. He was leaving it a survivor. But the karma wasn't done yet. As Kyle stepped onto the plane, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. It was a notification from Twitter. A video titled, "CEO Dad Saves Son from Racist Gate Agent at JFK," was already trending. It had 200,000 views in 10 minutes. Kyle looked at the thumbnail. It was a freeze frame of Brenda's face, the exact moment the handcuffs went on. He slid the phone into his pocket. He didn't need to watch it. He had lived it. And as he stepped onto the plane, leaving the wreckage of Brenda Vance's career in his wake, he knew one thing for certain. Life comes at you fast. But karma comes at you faster. The transition from the terminal to the jet bridge felt like stepping between two different dimensions. Behind them lay the chaotic noise of the terminal, the murmurs of the crowd, the crackle of police radios, the sobbing of a woman whose career had just evaporated. Ahead of them lay the hermetically sealed silence of the jet bridge, that narrow, accordion-like tunnel that serves as the umbilical cord between the earth and the sky. Kyle walked slightly behind his father. The adrenaline that had kept him upright during the confrontation was beginning to curdle into a shaky, cold exhaustion. His knees felt watery. Every time his heart beat, he felt a sharp throb in his left shoulder where Officer Miller had twisted the joint, and a burning sting around his wrists where the nickel-plated handcuffs had bitten into his skin. He looked at his father's back. Alexander Sterling was walking with his usual purposeful stride, but there was a tension in his shoulders that Kyle rarely saw. Alexander was a man who glided through life, parting crowds like the Red Sea. But right now, he looked like a man who wanted to tear the walls down with his bare hands. At the end of the jet bridge, the heavy aircraft door stood open. The flight crew was lined up in the galley, a formation of immaculate uniforms and terrified faces. News travels at the speed of light in an airport. The flight attendants, the purser, and the pilots already knew exactly what had happened just 50 yards away. They knew their boss was coming. They knew his son had been assaulted by their colleagues. The air in the galley was so thick with anxiety, it was almost unbreathable. Captain James Reynolds, a veteran pilot with 30 years of experience, stepped forward. He wasn't just an employee. He was a man who had flown Alexander to Davos, to Tokyo, to London. He knew the family. "Mr. Sterling," Reynolds said, his voice grave. He didn't offer a handshake, perhaps sensing that Alexander wasn't in the mood for pleasantries, or perhaps noticing Kyle's injured wrists. Reynolds looked past the CEO and made direct eye contact with Kyle. "Kyle, we just received the report from the station manager. I cannot express how appalled we are." Kyle tried to smile, but his lip split open again, a fresh drop of blood welling up. "It's not your fault, Captain. It happened at my gate, on my flight," Reynolds replied firmly. "That makes it my business. We're ready to push back the second you're settled. We'll get you out of here." They moved into the first-class cabin. The contrast was jarring. Minutes ago, Kyle had been face down in the industrial dust of the terminal carpet, smelling floor wax and old shoes. Now he was stepping into the sanctuary suite, Ascend Airways' most exclusive product. The scent here was white tea and thyme. The lighting was a soft, calming amber. The seats weren't just chairs. They were private, enclosed pods upholstered in hand-stitched Italian leather. Alexander didn't go to his assigned seat in 1K immediately. He waited for Kyle to sit in 1A. As Kyle lowered himself into the seat, his body finally betrayed him. The tremors started in his hands and moved up his arms. It was the crash, the physiological reaction to a threat to one's life. He slumped back, closing his eyes, his breathing shallow. "Elena," Alexander barked, though he kept his voice low. The chief purser, Eleanor, appeared instantly at his elbow. She looked horrified, seeing the state of Kyle up close, the dirt on his hoodie, the blood on his chin, the red, angry welts on his wrists. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Bring the first aid kit, the real one, not the basic pack, and get me a bucket of ice and 2 towels. Now." "Immediately, sir." Alexander sat on the ottoman at the foot of Kyle's suite. He reached out and gently took Kyle's hands. For the first time in years, Alexander looked not like a titan of industry, but like a terrified parent. He ran his thumb over the deep indentations left by the handcuffs. "They were too tight," Alexander whispered, almost to himself. He ratcheted them all the way down. "I'm okay, Dad," Kyle said, though his voice wavered. It's just the adrenaline." "You are not okay, Kyle. You were assaulted." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I should have been here sooner. I was in the lounge. I saw your text 8 minutes late. If I had just looked at my phone—" "Dad, stop," Kyle said, opening his eyes. "You came. That's what matters." Elena returned with a silver tray. It held the medical kit, a bowl of crushed ice, and steaming towels. She set it down with trembling hands. "Is there anything else I can get you, Mr. Sterling? A drink? Some aspirin? Whiskey?" Alexander said. "Blue label. Neat. And a ginger ale for Kyle." "Actually," Kyle rasped, "can I get a water? Just a lot of water." "Of course." As Eleanor retreated, Alexander went to work. He wasn't a doctor, but he was a man of action. He wrapped the ice in the towels and gently applied them to Kyle's wrists. The cold bit, but then it numbed the throbbing fire in Kyle's nerves. Alexander then took an antiseptic wipe and carefully cleaned the cut on Kyle's lip. The intimacy of the moment was profound. Here were 2 men who usually communicated through text messages about stock prices or university grades. Now the father was tending to the son's wounds in the hushed silence of a $20,000 airline suite. "I fired them," Alexander said, breaking the silence as he dabbed at the cut. "But that doesn't feel like enough." "It's enough for now," Kyle said. He winced as the alcohol on the wipe stung, the look on her face when she realized who you were. It was like her entire reality collapsed. "She was banking on your silence," Alexander muttered. "She was banking on you being powerless. That's what the system relies on. It relies on people being too afraid or too poor to fight back." He looked at his son, his eyes dark with a sudden, heavy realization. "Kyle, if you hadn't been my son, if you had been anyone else, she would have gotten away with it. Miller would have thrown you in a cell. You would have a criminal record, and she would be eating dinner right now thinking she did a good job." Kyle looked out the window. The plane was pushing back. The tug vehicle groaned beneath them. "I know," Kyle replied softly. "That's what I was thinking the whole time I was on the floor. I was thinking about my roommate, David. He's from Chicago. Doesn't have a rich dad. If he was in that hoodie, he wouldn't be on this plane right now." The gravity of that statement hung in the air between them. The privilege that had just saved Kyle was a shield, but it was a shield that only covered him. It didn't cover the millions of others who looked just like him. The engines roared to life, a deep, thrumming vibration that shook the floorboards. The captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and professional, betraying none of the tension from the gate. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 908 service to Zurich. We apologize for the slight delay at the gate due to a security issue that has now been resolved. We are number 1 for departure." Alexander sat back in his own seat across the aisle, but swiveled it so he could keep watching Kyle. As the plane taxied, they passed the terminal building. From this height, looking down through the triple-paned glass, the world below seemed small and insignificant, but the flashing lights were visible. Down on the tarmac, near the baggage carts of Gate A4, 2 Port Authority police cruisers were parked. The back door of one was open. Even from this distance, Kyle could see the navy blue uniform. He could see the blonde bun. Brenda Vance was being guided into the back of the cruiser. Her head was bowed. She wasn't fighting. The armor of her authority had been stripped away, leaving just a woman facing the consequences of her own hate. Kyle watched until the plane turned onto the runway and the police cars disappeared from view. "She worked for you for 22 years, Kyle said. "And in 22 minutes, she destroyed her legacy," Alexander replied, cold and hard. "I don't care about tenure, Kyle. I care about character. Ascend Airways is supposed to be about connecting people. What she did, it was the opposite. It was segregation. It was hatred." The plane accelerated. The G-force pressed them back into the leather seats. The ground fell away. Queens, the grid of Brooklyn, the grey waters of the Atlantic. They punched through a layer of clouds and into the brilliant, blinding gold of the late afternoon sun. Once the seatbelt sign chimed off, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. It was time for damage control. Alexander pulled his laptop out of his bag. "I need to draft a statement. The video is going to be everywhere by the time we land. I need to get ahead of the board of directors." "Dad," Kyle said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his phone. "It's already everywhere." He turned the screen toward his father. He had connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi. Twitter, X was open, trending number 1 worldwide. Lars Ascend while arrested, trending number 2 worldwide. What Kyle Sterling, trending number 3 worldwide. Lars boycott, Ascend. The video the young woman had taken was at the top of the feed. It had 4.2 million views. It had been posted 18 minutes ago. Alexander watched the video again on Kyle's screen. He saw himself storming the gate. He heard his own voice threatening Officer Miller. He saw the way he knelt beside Kyle. He scrolled down to the comments. Finally, a CEO who actually stands up for his family instead of hiding behind PR. The way that guard twisted his arm made me sick. Sue them into the ground. Wait, the kid in the hoodie is the heir? That gate agent is cooked. This is satisfying but also sad. Imagine if his dad wasn't the CEO. We need to talk about that. Alexander stopped reading. He looked at Kyle. "Are you okay with this? Your face is all over the internet. Your anonymity is gone. You're not just a student anymore. You're a symbol." Kyle stared at the screen. He touched his swollen lip. He thought about the fear he had felt when the handcuffs clicked. He thought about the humiliation of being displayed like a criminal in front of hundreds of people. "I don't mind," Kyle said slowly. "If this exposes what happens, if it makes people see the reality, then let them watch." Alexander nodded, a look of immense pride crossing his face. "You're stronger than I am, son. I would have wanted to burn the airport down. You're thinking about the message. Burning it down doesn't fix it," Kyle said, leaning back. "You have to rebuild it." "Better." A silence settled over them, but it was a comfortable one. The stewardess brought the dinner menus, moving with a hushed reverence. She placed a glass of vintage Dom Perignon on Alexander's table and a fresh bottle of water on Kyle's. "Mr. Sterling," she whispered to Alexander, "I just wanted to say, on behalf of the crew, we are so sorry. We had no idea Miss Vance was capable of that." "Thank you, Elena," Alexander said, his voice softer now. "But I didn't know is no longer an acceptable excuse at this company. We're going to retrain everyone, including the crews. Bias training isn't going to be a PowerPoint presentation anymore. It's going to be mandatory, rigorous, and constant. If anyone has a problem with that, they can find another airline." "Understood, sir," she said, looking at Kyle. "And for you, Mr. Sterling, the chef has prepared the sea bass. But if you'd prefer something simpler, we can make whatever you like." "The sea bass is fine," Kyle said. "Thank you." As she walked away, Kyle turned to his dad. "You know, there is one funny thing about all this," Kyle said, a small smirk playing on his lips. "What's that?" "Brenda said she was protecting the Diamond Lane from riffraff," Kyle chuckled dryly. "Technically, she just got the biggest piece of riffraff in the company banned for life." "Herself?" Alexander laughed. It was a genuine, belly-deep laugh that released the tension in his chest. "That she did, Kyle, that she did." He raised his champagne glass. Kyle raised his water bottle. "To justice," Alexander said. "To karma," Kyle corrected. They clinked glasses. Outside the window the sun was setting, painting the horizon in bruised shades of purple and red. The darkness was coming, but inside the cabin, at 35,000 feet, the lights were on, the path was clear, and for the first time that day, Kyle Sterling felt truly safe. He adjusted his seat into the lie-flat position. His wrists still ached, and his lip still throbbed, but as the hum of the engines lulled him toward sleep, he realized something. The world had seen him as a thug. Brenda had seen him as a threat. But the man sitting across from him saw him as a son. And for today, that was enough. The video of the incident went viral before the plane even landed in Zurich. It was viewed 40 million times in 24 hours. Ascend Justice trended worldwide. Brenda Vance was charged and eventually pleaded guilty to filing a false police report and assault. She lost her pension. Miller lost his license to work in security anywhere in the state of New York. Kyle Sterling graduated from MIT 2 years later. He didn't go work for his dad immediately. Instead, he launched a startup, an app that allowed passengers to instantly report and live stream civil rights violations at airports, connecting them directly with pro bono legal aid. He called it Gatekeeper. What happened to Kyle is a nightmare scenario, but for too many people, it's a daily reality. Have you ever been judged or profiled based on how you look? How did you handle it? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If you believe that justice should be blind and that everyone deserves respect, hit that like button to help spread this message. And if you want more stories where karma strikes back against the arrogant and the entitled, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss next week's story. Stay safe out there, and thanks for watching.